4 to 13. Any alterations, additions? Councillors, let me know. I thought there might have been, so Councillor Becky moves these acceptance of these minutes as a true and correct record of June the 11th meeting, and seconded by Councillor Williams. Any alterations? No. All those in favour of these minutes be accepted, please say aye. Against, declare it carried. Matters arising, item 4. Yep.
The updates on the nitrate studies we mentioned at the last meeting, are we likely to get an update on that at some stage?
There was an update to the zone committee, so it was. Did he give it? Tim Davey gave it.
Is it minuted on that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know. We'll have to check. Can we check?
It would be really good, Sophie, if that could be circulated to us. Just that was one of particular interest. Thank you.
Yes, Tim.
Is this the WDC?
No, this was. Yes, it was the one about the wells, the high nitrates on the wells, sort of north of north of Christchurch in our patch that were showing that rise, and yes. Oh, okay. Yes. Yep. Okay. Just a reminder, councillors need to use the microphones for recording. Thank you. Any other updates? Sorry, any other matters arising? No. I was just looking myself. No, that's all right. All right. We don't move in second matters arising, do we? Or do we? Perhaps we don't. All right, thank you. Item 5, no deputations or presentations, and so let's move to item 6, which is a planting proposal for Fernside Springs. These are headwater springs for the Southbrook stream on Pinevale Farm, and pass over to our Water Environment Advisor, Sophie Allen, to take us through the report. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. So Pinevale Farm is in Fernside, as Sandra explained. It is part of the Southbrook catchment, which flows into the CAM, and has been considered as part of the CAM River Enhancement Fund. I think back in 2018 there was an allocation of funding by the CAM River Enhancement Fund subcommittee, which included consultation with DOC and North Canterbury Fish and Game. Were present at that meeting and gave their approval of that allocation of funding. So 33,000 was allocated to Fernside Springs at that stage. We thought initially that the works would be, we scoped out larger amounts of works than what is proposed here, and that did include fencing. Things have changed since then, where fencing is now required under Plan Change 7 for cattle, and so it's something that we're not considering to fund, but planting is something that we can fund at this site. So it's we are still looking at potentially allocating that full amount, but doing it in a staged approach where we work with the landowner to make sure things are going well. Where they've already fenced off, they haven't got around to fencing off a couple of other spring heads, so it's a bit of an encouragement for them to do the right thing, and they are working with us now. It's been a long discussion, as you might know, but it seems to be working towards a positive outcome, where they are putting in the fencing and are looking at committing to the maintenance post the 2 years, where we have said initially we'll look after the plants during the early stages. So I'm happy to take questions about how this might work. It is something that we have been doing sediment traps, for example, on which is probably more of a community benefit, but we haven't looked at private planting on private land as for the CAM River Enhancement Fund. So just keen to get your feedback on that in particular.
Madam Chair. Just the what checks and measures will we have on the maintenance?
Yeah, so we've got the first 2 years of maintenance by us, by a contractor on behalf of WDC. So that should be enough for these particular species we're looking at. That should be enough. Sometimes for other species you might need 3 years, but these are quite fast-growing wetland plants, so 2 years should be sufficient. We have made clear with both the leasee and landowner that the maintenance will be their responsibility after that period. It's something that we could we're looking at getting a signed letter agreement. It's not something that can be easily enforced, however, because Environment Canterbury have such agreements with people for immediate steps funding, and for example if the land is sold, unless you have something on the title, it's not something you can enforce. Or for example with stock damage, there have been cases where that's a very difficult discussion, and it's hard to guarantee if stock did get in that the landowner would replace the plants. What we could insist is that the fencing, Sandra's raised that there's only 2 wires on one of the sides that got, so the new fencing has 4 wires, but some of the fencing that was already in has only got 2 wires, so we can insist that they've upgraded that to at least 3 with an outrigger or 4 wires before the plants went in.
You might like, there's 4 pictures here of the Lehman's Road, which is a larger planting proposal. Can we just flick through them? I took these, so that's the spring head, which is on your page 16. That's this bit here. That's here, looking from Lehman's Road here up the spring. That's that bit there, and there's 200 metres along the road. So
you can see the 4 wires on the side along the road, and then there's the 2 wires there.
Yeah, that's a boundary fence there, which he hasn't, that's an existing boundary fence. And the actual new fencing is going away from you in a parallel direction, in a right angle to the photo. That's naturally regenerated wetland plants. That's the flow of the spring coming down towards the roadside. So
we're not looking at...
and that... Yeah, that's the corner that...
So we're not looking at planting anything in here. That's, like Sandra said, it's already native vegetation, but just further along this side here, that's where we'll be putting in similar sort of plants. Nothing too high. I mean, potentially this could have been kahikatea in the past, but we're not looking at putting in kahikatea trees straight away. We're looking at putting in rushes, reeds, grasses that... In the future, you could put some more trees in, but I think in terms of for the farmers, we're saying we're not putting any big trees in.
Yep. Oh, Councillor Williams was first with questions.
Mine's sort of been answered a wee bit, but I was concerned about stock getting in it, and that looks like it's an electric fence, a 2-wire electric fence with stock's going to go through that quite regular in that type of fence, because they do, particularly getting down into water in areas. I think it needs to be a bit more substantial fence to keep animals out. Otherwise we're going to plant, and a month later there's going to be no plants left. So if we don't get a substantial enough fence, I don't know how you, what have you got organised to make sure there's a stock-proof fence for long term?
Yeah, so one of the issues is that stock exclusion does qualify, one hot wire does count as stock exclusion currently, so we would be going above what's considered stock exclusion. I agree that we should be saying 2 wires it's a potential. I mean, we have seen in the past that stock have got in, it is just cattle, it's not sheep, just to be clear, but cattle can still get through 2 wires, particularly if the ground is irregular, so that there are maybe some hollows or places where. So we could say that the minimum that we would be looking at is 3 wires as a suggestion with all the hot wire.
Councillor Mealings first.
So are those hot wires that we're going to stipulate with the 2 or 3 wires? Because, what they do is they stick their heads through the fence. And if anything's going to be, if there's only 1 wire that's going to be hot, it should be the bottom one. But yeah, I've seen calves get into these plantings and just decimate them on farms that I've been on. But my question is actually about you're saying the trees and whatnot, and I did notice in the report that he didn't want trees planted along the roadside, but and I fully agree with that, but I think that is that along the entire road or just by the intersections? Because I know it's very problematic with the Fernside Johns Road Plaskett intersection with regard to visibility, but I can see like on these, like on that photo, that, you know, as long as it's not too close to the intersection where you've got visibility, you could probably get away with planting a few taller species further up the road.
Yeah, so we could plant further up. I haven't proposed that in this because of the focus on filtering out farm nutrients. There is quite a generous road swale, and so I'm with long grass, and there are some existing trees that are not native, but they might be providing some habitat for the waterway there. So I'm saying that's sufficient, and we should be focusing on the farm side on that spring.
Yeah, Councillor Blackie.
Yeah, fencing. Hot topic at my place at the moment, seeing my cattle have broken through fences like that 3 times in the last fortnight. 2-wire hot wire is completely inadequate when we're spending 14 grand. You've only got to get a power cut and you're defenceless, and the cattle will work it out in 15 minutes that there's no juice in the thing. You've got to have a proper fence there. Probably netting, cyclone netting, is cheaper than and probably better than a 4 or 5 wire fence. I would go so far as to say if we're not fencing that properly with a 4 to 5 wire or netting, we shouldn't be doing it at all, because they'll go through a 2-wire hot wire. And I mean, the fences now I've got are 1.2 netting and and a hot wire on top of that, and that pretty much keeps them out even if the power goes down. But an ordinary fence, they can jump it if they want to. You've got to have one hot wire without riggers or on top, as you know, or you've got to have cyclone. But a 2-wire hot wire like that is only good while the power's there. It's not even good while the power's there. They want to go through. As Nikki said, they put a head and shoulders through, and if they get a belt, they jerk forwards often instead of back, and they're through just like that. So and if in the winter when their coats are long, the thing doesn't give them enough belt through the long hair either. So no, you've got to fence it properly or don't do it.
Thank you.
Is that a permanent fence or is that just electric tape?
I think that's a bungee fence, potentially for access, just for that bit there. Yeah.
It might be. It might be too. That photo there is from the corner of Fernside and Lehman's. So the fence is actually, you can just see that's the stream. You can just see, yes, this is back at the corner. You can just see the fence post through the gorse on your there. Yeah, that's the proposed. There's another shot if you want to flick through to another one. Yeah, that's right at the corner. That's the strainer post, and you can see the fencing there, along there. You can just see a bit of wire.
Yeah, so that's where you have the 4 wires that have gone in. So, yeah.
And that goes along. You can see where we were looking at on the first shot. The spring is at right angles to the road, way further down. Councillor Williams. Oh, sorry. Yes, no, Councillor Barnett, before you better go. Yeah, thank you.
Sophie, I really like the fact that this is visible and that Fernside Road's a very popular road, obviously. But obviously I don't know all the history of all the springs that feed into the Cam catchment. Are there other areas that are going to want funding to do the same thing, other springs? And how was this one in particular selected?
Yes, so definitely there are lots of springs. Even potentially this owner has other springs that are on a different part of the property that could be fenced off. I don't know the history of why these particular springs were selected. It could be that, yes, the visibility, but it was before my time. So maybe Sandra could elaborate. Yeah.
Well, if you want me, yes, this goes back.
Yeah, I was
Yes.
just,
Okay.
and I think this,
Come to the table, Kel.
You have to talk into this, otherwise the public can't hear you. So,
I think this does tie in with our overall work that's been done on the Cam catchment and dating back to Henry Hudson's report of about 2016, I believe. So that actually, even though that was focused on the enhancement fund and how that gets allocated, that was very much okay, well, where are the hot spots across our district? And it was looking at a range of different things, from sediment traps to wetlands, and to spring heads like this. And there are a number of others in the Cam River catchment, over by Five Crossroads as well, at the head of Tuahiwi Stream. There's a number of spring heads there that have been identified for protection as well. So that's where it's originated from, and that whole process had identified the top areas that you could spend the enhancement fund on. I'm sure though, if you went around the Cam River catchment, you would actually find a lot of other areas that you could actually say have equal, potentially even higher priorities. But I would actually say that these projects are part of getting the ball rolling. You know, we need to be starting to spend some of the fund. It has been a long time coming, and a lot of work has gone in. Getting our consent in place, which should hopefully be imminent, will be enabler to getting some of these works done. And in the future, I think there'll be other areas within the Cam River catchment that we're identifying and coming back with, whether it's part of the zipper funding we've got, to actually look at improving other areas within the catchment. So there has been some work done that to distill it into priority areas. So I think you can have confidence as elected members that there's some thought and logic behind why this is being promoted, but at the same time, I'm sure you will find, and people will be aware of other high hotspots within the catchment that also need to be addressed.
Well, I can. This does go back to about 2000, when it was identified, before we got the Hudson report in its final version, way back in about 2007. This was a particularly hot spot. There's a major spring on the property by the gum tree, and then the gum tree, it rises there, goes along the roadside and then turns the corner down there. So this was identified as, and there were cows in it all the time. Now, the landowners now, and it's only in the last few months through implementation of a farm environment plan that he's done the fencing. So there was also an application from the landowner here. We've got two parties. We've got the landowner, Kathy Van Beek, and we've got Mark Hurst, who is the share milker. Kathy had originally applied to the fund before it, when it was administered by staff, to do some fencing and provide funding for a reticulated water supply so that it weren't going into the spring. So there's a long history of it, and the legislation and the plan changes have forced the landowner to up the ante and do some of the stuff that we originally proposed to offer to them, and that they weren't forthcoming in the initial stages. But now we have stepped back and basically enhancing the fencing that they've been required to provide with plantings, so that to reduce the nutrient runoff. This is as I said, you just need to stop up there and see it's a major spring head, which would be well to protect. And I agree with all the questions that have come up. We do need to ensure I'm going over my brief here, but we do need to ensure that the fencing is immaculate, because I've got, I mean, I complain about this farm because the cows get into the stream. And
So,
I've got,
Sandra, just going back to my question, the question is that if people see this and it's
Yes.
been provided plantings from the public purse, the question could be asked, why not my farm? So how are we going to answer that, and what was the strategy used to determine that this farm, as opposed to others, should get the funding? That's probably a question for probably Kelly, actually. Or
I think it's a good question. I think if we're looking forward, Kelly's going to be able to better than me answer looking back why this one was established as opposed to others. But if you're looking forward, there is a presentation coming up around funding in the future, and for biodiversity funding, which people may have access to in certain areas for significant natural areas, etc., where if people are coming to us and saying, well, what about my spring, what about my farm, we will be in a better position, hopefully, to be able to say, look, well, your farm's great, and we're happy to work with you, and these are all the things that we can do to actually enable you to get some funding, which is public funding, to be able to do stuff on your farm as well.
so this one's mainly because it's been worked on for a long time.
I would say so.
And it's further along than some of the others.
And it is quite significant.
And it's a significant area.
a
Okay.
major one.
Just wanting to be able to justify it to the
Yes,
public.
well, fair enough. Councillor Atkinson?
And I think that's the question, is it defendable? That's the real question, because if it's defendable, in my mind, there's no question, but if it's not defendable, then we are going to be challenged on it.
And just the 2 points I would add to that is that what I was responding to before is that part of this is actually to get the ball rolling. So we're not coming to you and saying this is the highest priority within the catchment. So I think this does fall into the category of it needs momentum. We do need to do something, and this is an area that has been identified to get it rolling. The other point I would make is, like, if we do end up in the situation of people coming back to us and saying, we've seen what you've done here, why aren't you doing something on my property? You could potentially argue we've actually achieved something in terms of people getting to think about what we're doing. So it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Thank you. Any more questions, Councillor Williams?
Next question is about the gorse. Because there's no animals in the near, the gorse is going to overrun the plantings, because that's what happens. Is that going to be removed?
So it's not something that our council would be in charge of removal. I think it's listed under the regional pest management as a boundary plant, where the landowner has responsibility for it now, and will continue to have that responsibility. It won't disturb the plantings. I mean, the plantings can grow up around it, but it's not something that we're going to take responsibility to remove. And if they don't, then I have said there will be weeds that will come up that will be your responsibility in the future.
It's just if we're going to do it, the enhancement, looking for the thing, would be important, but you don't want heaps of old gorse bushes around ruining that look as well, that's all.
I think it's going to be a common theme with stock exclusion coming in, that we're going to see lots of margins. Some will look amazing and some will but in terms of the species, I mean, insects will love the gorse, and birds will love the gorse, and skinks probably, it's still a useful plant in terms of biodiversity. So it's just it does spread on agricultural land, so it's more of an agricultural pest than a biodiversity pest. Yeah.
Councillor Moniz?
Just with regards to that gorse, are we taking the view with the gorse that of it as a nursery plant? Because it's well known to be something that is good to have in place to enable the establishment of the natives underneath, and then it gets removed.
It is also a nitrogen fixing plant though, so it does leach nitrate into waterways. If you get it in quite a high density, you could be creating a source of nitrate. So
if,
pros and cons.
So if we could, would we advocate for its removal prior to start?
With a few isolated plants, I wouldn't say there would be a significant source, so I wouldn't justify it for that reason. if you think that that's important for the visibility of the project and and the impression, then that's a decision we can try.
Not just visibility, but also the fact that it's well known that the viability of gorse seed it extends over 30 to 50 years. So any one of those seeds from those flowers on those bushes will be good for ever. So if it's something that we do want to see less of, then maybe we should start with a clean slate and just give the idea that it shouldn't be there. But if we're taking the point of view that it's a nursery plant to enable the establishment of the preferred species, then that's another tack, really.
In this situation, gorse wouldn't be necessary for establishment. I mean, you're probably on very harsh, windy sites with very dry. That's where you probably want that nursery plant. But here it wouldn't be. So removal wouldn't be an issue. But it's just whether we, as a council, want to. When I go back to the landowner and the leasee and say these are the conditions: upgrade the fencing, signed agreement. Gorse removal, just that negotiation might get harder and harder to get traction.
But I think what they're getting from us, particularly this project, they're actually getting a significant donation towards this, if you will, and a couple hours with the digger, and that would be done and dusted really quickly, and then they could start with a good clean slate. If I'm not wrong. Are not farmers supposed to control, and actually they're supposed to remove gorse within, is it 5-10 meters of a boundary right now? I've seen a lot of gorse fences get pulled out in the last couple of years. So that's just remnants of something that should have been taken care of. But
No, that was actually...
Councillor Atkinson, yes.
That was actually my question. What are the requirements? And my understanding is that it's supposed to be removed. So if we don't start with the requirements, then we're starting on a bad foot.
Indeed.
So, I mean, if the requirements are that it's supposed to be removed within 10 metres of the boundary, then that's what should happen, because we're asking them to do some stuff here that around starting on the slate and where we want to finish. And I absolutely agree with Kelly about, let's start somewhere and get going, but it needs to be around, if there are requirements here you have to do, I think we should follow them.
Councillor Williams?
That
Sorry.
property, is it owned by Kathy Van Beek?
Yeah.
So she's the owner of it, but she's leasing it to a farmer. So
Yep.
who would be required, the owner or the leasee, to do this work? And who would be responsible, the owner or the leasee?
So I have discussed it with the leasee that he's been a long-term leasee from my understanding, and Kathy has said, talk to Mark about these things, and he has agreed that it is his job to maintain things such as gorse under control. But whether we can't, we won't have that ability to enforce this. I don't believe. I think it's more of a regional council issue to enforce the regional pest management plan.
Councillor, oh sorry, Mr. Brown.
You're right, we don't have the ability to enforce it because it's Environment Canterbury who can enforce gorse on the boundaries. And look, we get them on council land, we get little letters from Environment Canterbury asking us to clear the gorse on our boundaries sometimes as well, which is a little embarrassing, but does happen at times. So look, Environment Canterbury can definitely enforce it, and are we able to, the money which is primarily for planting, if the people on the farm have an issue with clearing the gorse themselves, they're not going to have an issue with the gorse being gone, of course, but an issue with the resource to be able to actually remove the gorse, are we able to use any of the funding that we have for planting to be able to remove the gorse before we actually put the planting in, noting that the gorse which is identified there, if you were just going to cut and poison that, it would be very cheap and not very labour intensive to do because it's not a very big area.
It's only a few bushes. Yeah.
So we do have additional funds that from what I understand, the Canberra River Enhancement Fund isn't tied to. I mean, if we wanted to, we could fund fencing out of it, and I think a fencing upgrade is something we can definitely fund because, as I mentioned, just one hot wire is considered stock exclusion, and so if we did fencing upgrade, that is the discretion of the fund, or to cut and paste gorse. It's just a question of if we think that that's how the funding should be spent.
Councillor Blackie?
Carrying on from Chris's comments with the fencing, using money out of the system for fencing, because I'm still very worried about that. Because what are we going to do if the lessee farmer decides that his standard of fencing is all he's going to pay for, and we say well, that's inadequate. I mean, I'd like to see a recommendation go in here that this does not proceed unless the fencing is fenced to our standard, our satisfaction, and I don't know how you connect. Sorry? Yeah, well, in a minute, yeah, because I mean, you know, Sandra's just alluded to the fact that this farm isn't a hell of a good at keeping stock out of race, so it's not a gold standard farm by the sound of it in terms of fencing stock out of waterways. So it's the same problem. So. Yeah, we've got to be very careful, or I won't support the planting till I'm happy that the fencing is adequate.
Sophie, if you look at the table on page 15, you mention about saving money with potentially some community input, which I really support. However, I just wonder, it's on a very main road, and we've had issues in the past with traffic management using community volunteers on main roads. Has that been considered?
So I should have mentioned that I have discussed the idea with the landowner and lessee, and we've come to the resolution that it's probably not the best to have a community planting event. So just, yeah, with that was after. So I had some initial discussions, but we had further discussions, and yeah. So it was. That's apologies. I should have mentioned that. Yeah.
So is traffic management included in this cost?
The traffic management for the contractor. No, so there's no traffic. It's accessed from the farm side. There's no planting along the road side of Lehman's Road. It's only a one-sided planting. Yeah.
So if traffic management's not required, why isn't community planting possible?
It's more an issue of health and safety on the farm. Yeah, and the time. They were concerned that it would take them time to organise the community planting event. And so I was offering my time, but I can understand it would take some effort from their behalf as well.
I guess it's important to note that this is not our land. If this was a piece of council land, we'd have staff resources and we'd have time and other budgets that we could use to enable the community to be able to actually get some benefit and empowerment and ownership of areas like this. But often when you talk to farmers, they they take health and safety very seriously, but they also understand the time constraints and the cost that comes with those health and safety. So it's a negotiation, to get to a point where you can even give money. I know it sounds strange, you're giving money to someone to do something positive on their farm, but often that's a long negotiation to even get to that point, to try and get stock out and to get the real biodiversity and water quality benefits that we're trying to get. So we only want to push so hard in terms of getting them to do certain things. So it may be that where we're looking at fencing and gorse, that might be something which we can ask them to do, but it might be something that this fund has to go a little bit towards paying for as well.
So could I just ask, if something's fundamental in a report changes like that is brought to our attention when people speak to their reports?
Yeah, that's a fair point. Thank you.
Add an amendment, Madam Chair. Can C become D, and the new C reads that the scheme proceeds on the contingent that the fencing is done to council satisfaction prior to any planting. Well, it'll come back to the committee, and we'll look at what the farmer's proposing.
Probably need to specify something and suggest, as far as what would be satisfaction.
The project, what did I say? I can't remember what I said. The project proceeding is contingent upon the fencing being adequate to council satisfaction prior to planting. And do you want me to add? No, I didn't want to dictate how they actually fence it, but well, council staff satisfaction. You know what we've said. It's got to be wire. It's got to be over at least 1 metre high, and it's got to have a hot element.
If you were just to add to the end of that, to ensure stock exclusion, then
Yeah, okay.
we'll make it. We'll make sure it's adequate for the purpose
Yep.
specifically of excluding.
Okay.
Councillor Williams, second. So that actually becomes the original motion because you did the second.
No, Paul.
No. Sandra said she was moving.
Oh, yeah.
Rather than another amendment.
Madam Chair, actually it doesn't, because all that was happening was the mover was accepting what Al put forward in the motion. It wasn't an amendment.
No. Sandra didn't get a seconder, so it's not.
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. Paul Williams.
Second.
Assistance of others here. I just want to add that I think I would like signage on both plantings to the effect that the Southbrook Headwater Spring Protection planting has been funded by the Cam River Rehabilitation Fund, and I would like that on that corner here and up at the Gumtree Spring to acknowledge that this is in fact publicly funding a private gain but also a wider public gain. Thank you. So where do we go from here?
So what's the motion originally moved? So it was Al the...
Yes, Al originally plus an addition, me with another.
So Al hasn't debated it yet.
No.
Al, if you wish,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I knew it was getting
Councillor
messy.
Blackie and the seconder, if they were of a mind to, could incorporate that to the original motion, which might make it tidier than debating amendment by amendment. But if that was the case, but that's up to the mover if he's happy to, and the chair to accept it.
Yeah, because we before you arrived, we debated the whole fencing thing in quite detail. So I don't want to add any more debate.
No.
Do you wish?
The signage? Yeah. I want, well, as an addition, it can be another recommendation that is actually signage put here.
Consideration would be the cost. Those signs are, looking at the ones we put on the river, you're looking at $300 each for two signs. It's another $600.
So if you're not happy to accept, you don't have to add it.
Mm.
Up my amendment if we don't pass it.
No, yours remains. Yes, that's
So firstly, Madam Chair, Al needs to be able to speak to his motion,
away you go.
and then the seconder, and then if you wish to place an amendment at that point, that's where there's the opportunity, providing you've got a seconder.
Thank you. It's all right, people. I'm perfectly comfortable with this.
It's actually following standing orders,
Yes, it
Councillor
is.
Barnett. Thank you.
Which is what I was playing.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Councillor Blackie, would you like to speak to
No, I have nothing to add, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Williams?
Yeah, I think it's very, very important for us to have decent fencing to protect the money we put public money into the planting. So I think that's imperative to be done, and by the looks of the existing fencing, that is not adequate to suffice. So I'm quite comfortable as long as what Councillor Blakey was saying, if the fencing gets to a decent standard to keep the stock out of it long term, and I think it'll be a good enhancement for the area.
Thank you. Any other further contributions? All right, I'll put that.
Now you're making
No?
your amendment.
Am I? Oh, thank you. Well, I'll put in another recommendation, an addition, that that signage to the effect that this is this planting, spring protection planting, is funded by the Cam River Rehabilitation Fund, and a sign placed, doesn't have to be an expensive one, but I think it is really important that the public funding of this. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, well, a sign put on both plantings, and I ask for a seconder. Thank you. We've already got.
Now you get to talk to it.
Thank you. Yes, so I think it's really important. This is a first for this fund to put money into essentially private land, but certainly with a private benefit, there's no denying, but a wider public benefit, that this really important spring head, there's more than one spring head being protected here, is protected and enhanced by not just the fencing that the landowner has been required by law to put in, but enhanced by native planting and adding biodiversity contribution to the general landscape. Councillor Barnett?
Yes, I actually think signage is really, really important. Thank you. We've talked about how important the education is in this aspect. I'm sure that staff can come up with an option that's not too expensive, and I'm sure that they can come up with something that's appropriate for the area. But, you know, if this council is always asked, what are we doing in biodiversity? What are we doing in actually sustainability and protecting our waterways? This is something we are doing. Through the CAM Enhancement Fund. So I really think it's absolutely critical that we highlight that, and that should then also then encourage people who may want to say, oh, actually, what is the Cam River Enhancement Fund? It could actually give us some publicity. We probably should go and have an opening once we're there, because the whole point is getting this into the public eye so they take care of their rivers on their private land.
Yeah, look, I want to reiterate that. We just got a AA rating for our council, which most of us are critical on the of the communications around that and singing our praises. We're asked through every LTP about public-private partnerships. We're asked every time through our local plans, LTPs and things about what we're doing about sustainability, climate change, all of those other things. And unless we start to look after ourselves and these people that we're trying to encourage to do the right thing, then it will never happen. And, you know, contrary to Al, I'm not too worried about a reasonable cost. I don't mean a high cost for signage, but a reasonable cost, because if you're going to put signage there, it has to be visible, and it has to sing the praises of both parties and where we're going and what we're doing with this committee. I mean, we thought at the start of this election that this committee was well worth setting up. Now we're here, we're doing it, and it's underway, so why shouldn't we be saying to people, this is what's happening with your public money to make sure that you have a better life for your grandchildren?
I've got two ways of thinking on this. One, it's really good to put a sign up. The second way is at the thin edge of the wedge, when other farmers now, when they see that saying, exactly like Councillor Barnett was saying before, we want our corners planted as well. And, you know, it's a type of thing there, they may not realise the council's paid for it and all that drama, which is maybe, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it could open the floodgates for other people saying, well, we want our areas done, and you pay for that area, why aren't you going to pay for my area? So and join the queue, exactly. And so I've got reservations whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I just don't know.
Meetings. Right.
I was asked.
It's all
Good
good.
to know.
It always sounds nicer when you say it, but you know, it's just mealings.
Yeah, Paul, I hear what you're saying with the signage, but then again, this fund has $25,000 per year, plus Chris Brown has also indicated that there may be some other possible sources of funding that can be applied for, and I think that raising the visibility of these projects might actually, it is a thin edge of the wedge, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because for farmers to see, oh, he's excluding the stock from, and planting, another one of those planting projects, actually, that's a really good thing, and it looks really great. It looks good in the public eye, the perception of farming and whatnot. It's good for the environment. I can get some help with this, and I don't think that it's necessarily a negative if it brings it into the public mind, and also the minds of the landowners that it's a possibility, and we might actually get a bit more leverage on projects like this with there being more knowledge of their existence. So I don't think signs are bad, but I wouldn't like to see the signage to be, large and expensive and intrusive, because that's littering the countryside with signs. So, but I think a little bit of recognition as to how the projects came to be is not necessarily a bad thing. So I'll support this.
A sign up acknowledging the public funding of this protection work. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Declare it carried. Thank you. And now we a substantial motion, and that's already. Sorry.
You can speak to it and talk to it.
Yes, go ahead. I've got no idea what I'm doing.
If
Would you recognise that? Yes, excellent.
Look, I suppose I want to, and it came out in the last debate, for me, even though we have to look after the public purse and make sure that we're watching what we're doing with funding, for me this is not about the funding, it's actually about the principle of what we're trying to do here. And I mean, I can remember sitting around a table 6 or 7 years ago, and all I got at the LTP was, we're farmers, we're not bad people. We're trying to do our best. And while there's an element of that, there's also the element of those that aren't. And the idea is to bring this together and make sure that we're all swimming from the same waterhead. And the money is actually really secondary. But if we don't tell people what we're doing, then we won't get to the mouth of the river. There we go again, you see. We just won't get there, and we won't get there without sludge on us, put it that way. So we need to make sure that the principle overstands any money that we're doing. It's our job as governors to make sure that money is kept in check, but that is a normal function of what we do. But the principle of this is actually the really outstanding thing that we need to make sure that we achieve. And it is a public-private partnership. Some people hate them, some people love them, some people have no idea what you're talking about. So that's our job, to educate people and make sure that these things all match up, and that as we go along, and it's generational, it's not in a 5-minute job, that they understand what it is that we're trying to do. And we need to, as a council, in my view, back to the signage, is make sure that we actually tell people what it is we do.
Yeah. I brought up the signage, but to get a bit of debate, I said I was sitting on the fence. I actually think it's a good idea for us to let people know. It's pardon? No. And I hope it does bring in a wee bit of a debate with people wanting to do their corners of their properties and enhance the different areas. And we've got a wee bit more money left, so we could possibly start a second ball rolling and doing that type of thing. But we need to let the rest of the people, if there is a big roll-on effect from this, that we aren't a bottomless pit with money for it, and just encourage other people to follow the council's start of it. And I think it's long-term will be a good thing when it gets going, if we've got a decent fence to keep that stock out of it.
Thank you, people. Yes, excellent. Yes, I do support this the wider aspect of the planting, and I very much welcome the amendment that we get fencing that we're comfortable to our satisfaction, because I took these photos and when I saw it I was a bit disappointed about whether in fact it was going to be as stock proof as we did want it. Passing this farm every day, I do see that these paddocks are very rarely grazed. They're quite small, so there's not much stock in there, and certainly the gum tree one is a little wee triangular piece of land that if there's if there's cows in there, it's a few hours. But the thing particularly about signage here is that not only does it demonstrate public-private partnership, the use of the fund, the first real public use, visible use of the fund, it is also going to give a signal to the public and the farming public that the council's put money into this, and it's also an incentive to this farm particularly to keep up good maintenance practice. This is very, very public, and the farmer is very, very well aware of the scrutiny that the farm is under. And the fact that we've got a sign up saying this public funds have gone into there, I imagine that if there is any breach of any fencing, the maintenance starts to slide, that we'll hear about it, and that is all very welcome. And it's the only way we can guarantee that the public input to this project, and $14,000 worth of plants is substantial, that is actually recognised and publicised. So I'm very keen that a good sign, but not an expensive sign, is put on both sites. Anybody else want to? No, that's me, isn't it? All right, now, right of reply to, thank you, Councillor Blackie.
Very briefly, just emphasising the fencing thing, at Silver Stream Reserve we've had over the last 5 years or so 3 episodes I can remember where stock, twice cattle and once horses broke in. They can eat 6 or 8 of those animals can eat $1,000 worth of trees an hour. If they're in there all night, they could wipe the entire project out overnight. The fencing thing is very critical.
All right. I'll put the recommendations with the additions and amendments. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, declare it carried. And from this passing of this, I expect that we will all expect that staff come back with the revised fencing program proposal to us. It may be just an email, but we need to be understand what is how our fencing requirement goes with the landowner and what comes back. And if there is a proposal, for instance, to go into the fund to upgrade the fence, this committee would surely want to debate that. Thank you. Well, I think that's all we have as far as we move on to questions, item 7, and I have none. Urgent general business, none of that either. So I will close this meeting at whatever time that is. Oh, hang on, 10:25. We close the meeting, And we now move on to some briefings, and Sophie will take them.